In this presentation, I'm going to discuss some textile motifs that we have at the very controversial monument of Takebustan in northwestern Iran. And specifically, I would like to focus the attention on a specific composite creature which has been called in the past Simurg in Persian, Senmurv in Middle Persian. And I would like to discuss about this motif because I don't think it's Sasanian and its identification demonstrated to be incorrect. First of all, I would like to call your attention on the site of Takebustan. As you can see in this slide, Takebustan, where the brown arrow is not in the region of Fars. Sasanian rock reliefs which are not concentrated in Fars are very few. Actually, we have 3. We had 4, but 1 was destroyed. And the one in Salmas, which is on the border with Turkey and modern Armenia, and the one in Ragebibi in modern Afghanistan cannot be considered typical Sasanian rock reliefs because they are practically fixing the borders of the Sasanian Empire. So Takebustan is something completely unusual, very strange monument, actually a complex because we have 2 grottos and 1 external rock relief. But from the very beginning, we understand that there is something strange because Takebustan is not localized in Fars. We could say that 99% of Sasanian rock reliefs are concentrated in Fars. Takebustan is outside. So first problem. This is a view of the complex. We are going to concentrate our discussion in the bigger grotto, which is the part of the monument on the left side, so the so-called bigger grotto. There is also a second grotto, the smaller one, which is pretty clear. We have a long Middle Persian inscription telling us who did it in the 4th century, so no problems. And then we have this external rock relief on the right in this slide, which is another problem for other reason. Anyway, we are not going to discuss the entire monument. In the bigger grotto, we have a variation of textile motifs that we do not have in any other Sasanian rock relief. From an architectonic point of view, the bigger grotto is a cube with 1 open side with this big arch and crenellation on the upper part. Just besides the arch, we have 2 angels or winged victories that we could consider as rooted in Greco-Roman art, and then we have some reliefs inside the grotto. Since textile motifs are carved on the garments of people inside the grotto, we are going to concentrate our attention there. This is just a sketch to make you understand what you see when you look at the monument just in front of you. You see the back of a grotto, which is divided on 2 levels. On the upper part, we have a king in the middle, and 2 deities beside the king, most likely Anahita, the god of water and fertility, on the left, and Ahura Mazda, the main god of Zoroastrianism or pre-Islamic Persian religion, on the right. On the other level, below the feet of these three figures, we have probably the representation of a king in full armor with weapons and a large halo behind his head, sitting on a horse, and this horse present as well a heavy armor. Most of the weapons of the king, such as the quiver and the bow case, are not typically Sasanian. It's something coming probably from Central Asia and specifically from the steppe world. Practically in that period, it's something that is connected to the Turks. Now, from an architectonic point of view, Takebustan cannot be considered a typical Sasanian monument. In fact, in Azerbaijan, which is in the northern part of Iran, now bordering the ex-Soviet Republic of Azerbaijan and Armenia and part of Turkey, we have something like this. This monument is called Kaleye Zahak. It's a romantic name, of course, decided by archaeologists, but it's the shape which is particularly for us. In this sketch, in this slide, we can see that once more we have a monument which is very similar to the bigger grotto in Takebustan. Actually, we have arches on every side. The structure is like a cube with some decoration, and above, again, we have this crenellation. So, Takebustan is not a monument from an architectonic point of view that we could consider typically Sasanian, because during the Parthian period, Kaleye Zahak is late Parthian, we had already something very similar. And moreover, in Hatra, which is now in northern Iraq, so not very far from Takebustan, and a site which is not Persian, but we had many Parthian elements in Hatra during the 1st, 2nd, and even 3rd century CE. And very interesting, we have this kind of relief. We have an arch with crenellation above and some winged victories, which are flying above this person who's doing some kind of ritual inside the arch. So, Parthians and people connected to the Parthians, at least until the 2nd, 3rd century CE, knew structures like this. That's why we cannot consider Takebustan a specific Sasanian monument. Moreover, we have to jump many centuries earlier in Nineveh, the so-called capital of the Assyrian, or better, Neo-Assyrian Empire. We already have something which is very similar to Takebustan. Here is an enlarged image of what we have in this hunting scene above a hill. It's not exactly a triumphal arch like we have in Rome, for example, but it's probably a pavilion which is in a park, exactly like Takebustan. Takebustan was not very far from a hunting park, probably destined to the king for his personal pleasure. And we are looking now at this monument from the Assyrian period just in front, and we see what was represented on the back, on the rear part of this pavilion, of this grotto, if you want. It was not attached to a mountain, but in any case, the structure is very similar to Takebustan. Yeah, the only difference is that this one is not connected with a mountain like Takebustan. But still, we have something very interesting, in my opinion. We have only 2 dimensions here, so it was not possible for the artist who did this representation to give the idea of 3-dimensionality, but still we have an idea of a monument which is very similar to Takebustan. And I would like to call your attention on the fact that the king hunting lions from this chariot is like represented above. So the representation is divided on 2 levels. We have an upper level with hunt and a lower level with something that is not represented, or it was probably painted, or some stucco was there. In any case, here it's completely empty. Now, if we compare Takebustan with this very ancient Assyrian relief, the Assyrian relief is 7th century BCE. Takebustan is probably 7th century CE, the period of Khosrow II. But still, despite this very long interval, this very big chronological discrepancy, we have monuments which are very similar. Of course, in Takebustan, we expect to have other elements, such as, for example, the shape of garments and the decorations, some weapons, etc., which are characteristic of a period when this monument was executed. But what it is important to keep in mind is that Takebustan cannot be considered a typical Sasanian monument. Even from an architectonic point of view, it's something which existed long before the Sasanians. It's something which is probably even connected with Mesopotamia. And just to complete this detail about Mesopotamian art, we have something not very far from Nineveh, which is still from the Neo-Assyrian period, and it's the division in two levels of a representation like the one we have in this slide. On the left, you can see the Assyrian king with the god and the goddess. See, he is between these two deities. It's interesting to see that the king is central and there is a god and a goddess, which is a division pretty much respected in Takebustan. The only difference is that in Takebustan, the king was represented between the gods, standing frontally, and the gods as well were frontally represented. Just around the corner, on the relief we have on the left, on the right of this slide, we have something very interesting for Neo-Assyrian art, which is the representation of a king with two attendants standing frontally. So this is something extremely ancient, and it was much earlier than Sasanian representations at Takebustan, and the Sasanians at Takebustan represented something connected, in my opinion, with something like this. That's why we have to be very careful when we approach Takebustan. We have to understand that it's not a typical Sasanian monument. This is an image which is rendering pretty well what is inside the monument. So, on each side we have rectangular panels representing the ruler. I do not want to say king because this is probably something different. We have a ruler hunting wild boars on the left and deer on the right. In front of us, we have, at the level of the other hunting panels, we have the king wearing the armor on his horse with this large halo. So we could say a divinized king or glorified king. And at the upper level, we have the king between the goddess and the god. It's interesting. This sketch is better represented. We can see that the frontal panel, the one has entering the grotto, has a kind of frame which is very similar to the frames we have on the wild boar hunting scene and the deer hunting scene beside. But everything is carved something like 1 meter deeper into the grotto. It seems like that somebody didn't keep the frame like the other frames, which present a very low relief, so very close to the same level of a frame itself. In this case, the frame is there, but the other sculptures, the one of a king on the horse, it's carved something like 1 meter inside, 1 meter deeper. And this is something which called the attention of scholars, because, for example, Marcus Mode proposed a very interesting reconstruction divided in different phases, and he proposed that in origin, all panels at Takebustan, so the two lateral ones and the one in front of somebody entering, accessing the grotto, were three hunting scenes. And the central one, the one which is now occupied by the king on horse, was in origin another low relief panel. Later, something happened. Somebody changed his mind and decided to destroy this hypothetical third hunting scene and decided to substitute it with the king sitting on the horse. And the only way to do this was destroying at the surface level and carved something like 1 meter in deep into the bottom, into the rear part of the grotto. This is very interesting because the phases at Takebustan are definitely something clear, in my opinion, because the two surviving lateral panels, the wild boar hunt panel on the left and the one with deer hunting scenes on the right, are definitely different in style than the king on the horse and the king between the two gods. This is, in my opinion, not something which happened because a king changed his mind, but because two personalities worked at Takebustan. We have a very important Islamic written source from the Islamic period, 12th century. It's the Mujmal al-Tawarikh in Persian language, telling us that Khosrow II had some construction in this place, and this place is called in the Mujmal al-Tawarikh Bistam. Bistam is a name of a maternal uncle of Khosrow II. He's called sometimes Bistam, Vishtam, Bastam, and this Bastam is called in Mujmal al-Tawarikh Farhad. But who else could be this person if the place is called with his name? In fact, sometimes Takebustan is not called Tak-e-Bustan, which means the arch of a garden, but it's called Tak-e-Bastam, the arch of Bastam. So the information preserved in Mujmal al-Tawarikh is telling us that Khosrow II built this place under the supervision of this person that we could identify with Bastam, and then Khosrow gave as a present the whole park, the whole hunting park with this building or buildings to this man that he respected very much. And we propose to identify this man with Bastam. Actually, it was an identification proposed by Gianroberto Scarcia from Venice University. And I think this identification is working pretty well with the hypothesis by Mode, because it's definitely explaining why we have at least two phases in the construction of Takebustan. Now, if we concentrate our attention on what we have in the wild boar hunting scene, so the panel which is carved in very low relief on the left entering the bigger grotto at Takebustan, then we can have some more interesting ideas about the chronology of this site and who built this place. And in order to do this, we have to concentrate our attention on textile. This is a slide completely dedicated to the wild boar hunting scene. The king is represented twice. In the very center, while shooting an arrow to a wild boar in front of him, the wild boar is represented twice, alive and already dead. This is typically Sasanian, but we already have in Mesopotamian art, like in the relief from Nineveh that I showed you earlier. Here in Takebustan, we have the king shooting the wild boar in the center, while on the right he is represented while taking the arrow from his attendant. So the garment is the same. The king is bigger in size than his attendants. he has just one big difference. On the right, in the moment he's taking the arrow, he has a halo behind his head. The halo is something that sometimes we have in Sasanian art, but it's probably coming from Central Asia. Something we see earlier in Kushan coins. The Kushans dominated Central Asia between the 1st and 3rd century. And it's something that we see also in Buddhist art because Kushans protected and promoted Buddhism, which is a religion which is not present in Sasanian Persia. Now, if we have a look at the decoration on the garments of this important person taking the arrow with this halo, we have these interesting motifs. We have flowers, we have some jewels, we have a specific belt, and we have this creature with a dog face, paws, wings, and a peacock tail. So this creature has been identified in the 30s of the last century by a Russian scholar called Camilla Trevier as a representation of Simurg or Sanmurv in Middle Persian, Saena Marega in a Western literature, which is a very problematic identification in my opinion, because in these written sources, the Simurg, Sanmurv, Saena Marega is always the same according to different periods, but still a creature which is rooted in Persian, Iranian mythology. The Simurg is described as a bird. That's the problem. And this creature is something else. And because this creature is present on this part of the panel in Takebustan, which is the wild boar hunting panel, we could probably think that here, the first stage of construction of Takebustan, we could have exactly what told us the Mujmal al-Tawarikh. That is, as I told you before, a written source dated to the Islamic period, the 12th century. So we have to be very careful when considering this source, but it's the only one we have. So in this source, it's said that the place in this village identified with Takebustan or Takibastam was started by Khosrow II and supervised by this general, this very important person. And this person could be Bastam himself. Exactly like for some people, legends, local legends, some written sources, the place was called Bastam, like Taki Bastam. Then in the first stage of construction, which has been identified with the hunting panels, the wild boar on the left and the deer panel on the right, then we could imagine that this is not a king, but is Bastam himself. Dress with a typical dress that he took from Central Asia, in my opinion. In fact, he was the governor of Khorasan at the time of Khosrow II. Khorasan is the region of eastern Iran, practically Central Asia. He also became the governor of Azerbaijan or Armenia, we don't know exactly, in the Caucasus. But it's important to connect him with Central Asia. He had Parthian origins, so he was a Central Asian himself. Unfortunately, in this specific image, in this slide, his face was not preserved. But in the image where he is shooting the arrow, we can see that he's not wearing the typical Sasanian crown. He's wearing a flat hat, which is much more comfortable for hunting. But in Sasanian art, for example, Sasanian silver dishes, we have always this crown. Every Sasanian king had his personal crown. Some of them, like Khosrow II, had several crowns. And Sasanian kings wanted to be represented with these crowns always. So this is very unrealistic because it's impossible to hunt with a very heavy crown in metal or precious metals. This hat that we have in this slide is much more comfortable. This is something very interesting, which is telling us that most likely this is not a typical Sasanian monument neither. In fact, Sasanians were more connected to exalting the idea of glorification of the king. The king was always central, and there was no realistic representation. Everything was idealized. But here we have something pretty concrete. This person is hunting with a comfortable garment and hat. And this hat is something that we have. For example, in Samarkand painting, the site which is nowadays called Afrasiab, the very ancient part of Samarkand, this painting is from approximately the mid-7th century, so it's contemporary with Takebustan. And we have a representation of a foreigner who is dressed with this hat, and moreover, on his garment there are decorations which are very similar to this dog face with wings and peacock tail creature. And if you look in the upper part of this slide, in the upper right corner, you can see some counter marks on Sogdian coins. Afrasiab, Samarkand are practically where the capital of ancient Sogdiana, this Central Asian region. And in these coins, we have a representation of this creature, which is very similar to the one we have on the garment of a man in Afrasiab paintings and in the wild boar hunting panel in Takebustan. And in this Sogdian painting, there is a representation of a foreigner, probably coming from somewhere in between Persia and Sogdiana, which is practically modern Afghanistan. And this is exactly where we should look for the place of origin of this kind of creature. What is interesting also in this representation of this creature on Sogdian coins is that we have an inscription, and the inscription is telling us what is this creature. It's written Farn. So Farn means glory. Persian Fareh, Far, Middle Persian Khvarna, Avestan Khvarena. So it's a glory, how can we say, something which is exalting the king, his aura, something which is necessary to the king to be king. In Persian literature, we have mention of this far everywhere, this glory. And probably the creature that we have here is not the Simurg, but the representation of glory. It's in the Sogdian art, in Central Asian art, that we should look for the origin of this kind of creature. But it's interesting that in 7th century, mid-7th century Samarkand paintings, this creature is not exactly connected with Sogdians, but with foreigners. So in this painting, we have foreigners, Bactrians, so people from Afghanistan in modern. If we consider the two stages of construction at Takebustan, like I try to summarize in this sketch of this slide, we have again the lateral panels, okay, the wild boar on the left and the deer hunting scene on the right. In the middle, we had something probably connected with hunting, which was destroyed and substituted with a king sitting on the horse. Who did this destruction? In my opinion, since Bastam rebelled against Khosrow II, who in the end was able to kill him, Khosrow probably at a certain point started the destruction of Takebustan, and he tried to remove everything which could connect Takebustan to his enemy, Bastam. And Bastam was even his uncle, so this rebellion took place from the family. Anyway, first stage, we have the 3 hunting panels. Second stage, Khosrow decided to destroy the central one, and then he represents himself as a knight, as a warrior, covered with an armor, sitting on his horse, and then above, again, the king with Ahura Mazda and Anahita. What is interesting to notice is that on some parts, in some textiles covering his legs on the rear part of a grotto, so on the leg of a warrior, we have again this creature that we could call pseudo-Senmurv, not Senmurv, because we know that this is the representation of glory, which is something that Bastam took from Central Asia when he was a governor there, when he was in good terms with the Sasanians, probably with Khosrow II. So before rebelling, he imported this motive. We have in the wild boar hunting scene in the left panel entering the grotto. On the back of the grotto, Khosrow starts the demolition and he starts to have some interesting decoration on his garment. He decided to reproduce on his own garment something which was not Sasanian, that his enemy took from Central Asia, most likely. And why he did this? Well, probably he wanted to appropriate as a trophy something which belonged to his enemy, something which was probably protecting his enemy. Like to say, it was protecting you, now it is protecting me. I defeated you because you rebelled against me, your nephew, and now it's my time. I'm going to be glorified with this Farn, not Senmurv motive. And here we have a better representation. The sketch is showing us exactly the creature which is represented on the garment of the warrior king. And on the right upper part, we have an image of this creature, again, with a dog face, wings, and peacock tail. This is something that didn't exist in Sasanian Iran earlier, and just at Takebustan, which is very late Sasanian, the period of Khosrow II, it's the very first time we have in Sasanian art. We have sometimes textiles, metal dishes in silver, presenting this creature. None of them was excavated. They come all from non-scientific excavations from the antiquary market, and we cannot be sure about the place of provenance and who did this, about the chronology. They could be early Islamic, if Persian, or they could be Central Asian. Many of them are Byzantine or even early Islamic. In early Islamic Persia, we have this creature everywhere. But during the Sasanian period, before Khosrow II, we are not sure. That's another point which is suggesting us that most likely we are dealing with something which was imported into Persia. And moreover, we don't have just the counter marks on Sogdian coins. A little bit earlier, we have some coins that I have presented in this sketch, in this slide, together with some unusual coins of Khosrow II, called Parvez, victorious. And we have this coin in the upper part on the left, which is presenting on one side the king with this huge crown with wings, long hair and beard, and on the other side we have the deity, probably, with these flames around his head. And this deity with no beard is very interesting. We don't have any inscription telling us exactly who is, but we could imagine that is a god connected with glory. So again, with Far. In Middle Persian, during the time these coins were minted, we still had Middle Persian used in Sasanian Empire, and we have everywhere the inscription, the glory increased. So we could think that this deity is connected with the glorification of a king who is on the other side of the coin. As I told you, if you look at the coins below the one of Khosrow II, in the middle part left, we have in Umayyad period, so very early Islamic, proto-Islamic, we could say, approximately 680, we have again the portrait of a Sasanian king on one side, and on the other side we have a representation of glory, which is already the dog with wings and the peacock tail. So the Arabs found during the very late Sasanian period this motive. Maybe they observed in Takebustan itself. They appropriated this symbol and they put everywhere, even on coins. And the Hans like Eftalites, Al-Khan, other groups localized in what is modern Afghanistan, started to have representation of this creature everywhere. And in the lower part here on the left side of the slide, I'm showing you a coin of a king called Spur. We don't know exactly if he was a Han, if he was a Turk, but he has the image of a king, of himself, with two of these creatures beside. And on the other side of the coin, we have again this god with the flaming nimbus, the halo of flames. And in Hunnic or Turkish coins during the 7th century, we have this creature everywhere. That's why some numismatists, some specialists, propose to identify this creature not with Sun Murv, but with a personification of glory. Again, we have these countermarks on Sogdian coins from the 7th century CE, imitating Sasanian coins, of course, but it's interesting to see that we have this creature, kind of a dog face with a wing and the tail of a bird, most likely a peacock, and then the inscription in Sogdian, Farn. Farn in Sogdian, in Persian is far, is practically the same word, meaning glory. And this is what it is, this creature. Extremely in fashion in Central Asia, imported probably by Bastam, and it became, in very late Sasanian period, in fashion in Persia. And then from there, it was exported in the Byzantine Empire, in the Caucasus, among the Arabs, and even the so-called barbarians of European kingdoms. So it was a creature which became extremely popular, at least until the 12th century. After that period, it was completely forgot. Now, in Sogdian art, we have possibly an attempt already in the 5th century, like in this painting I'm showing you in this slide, to combine this creature, this so-called pseudo-Sun Murv, which we should consider personification of Farn, glory, with a dog face, wings. So the Sogdians are trying to render this creature probably, but unfortunately in this painting, the creature which is coming out from one side of the throne of this deity is not complete. We cannot see the tail. And it's not excluded that this creature is not exactly our dog with wings and peacock tail. If you look carefully behind the ears, both in the sketch on the left and in the painting itself on the right, behind the ears you can see this curly horn. And this curly horn is of Mesopotamian art, which was extremely influential in Persia and in Central Asia for a very long time, practically until the coming of the Arabs and the adoption of Islam. For example, in this very famous creature, this dragon from the Ishtar Gate, which is now in Berlin, we have already this creature with this curly horn. So we have to be very careful when we try to identify that creature in Sogdian paintings, because probably the Sogdians knew very well Mesopotamian art, and they try to mix together many elements. It's not excluded that they used a creature with a dog face and wings, but that one in the Sogdian painting could have been just a winged dog. In any case, it's there, and it's 5th century CE. So it's the very first time we see something like that in Sogdiana, not in Persia, Central Asia. And in fact, when we started to have something like this in Sasanian Persia, is in one unique seal impression, which is preserved now in the British Museum. It's only one, and we have this creature with a face which looks like the one of a dog or an animal with pointed ears. We have a wing and the peacock tail. There is also an inscription in Middle Persian saying increase. So it should be the glory increased. And this creature is very similar to the Sogdian countermarks that I reproduce in this slide in the upper part. In some written sources, all written during the Islamic period in Arabic or Persian, we have some information about Khosrow II, who had at least one seal he used to seal official documents, and this seal was embellished with something called Khorasan Khora. Khorasan Khora or Khorasan Khwara means the glory of Khorasan, the glory of the East, something which was coming from the East. And according to Biruni, another Muslim scholar who lived in the 12th century, and he was saying that this Khorasan Khora looked like flying foxes, which in my opinion could be a very good description of the creature with a dog face, dog or fox anyway, very similar animal, with wings and a peacock tail. So that's why we have to be very careful when we propose identifications about late Sasanian art, because this seal is late Sasanian, and we have to consider that Sasanian Iran was a place where there were many exchanges along the Silk Road, and not only along the Silk Road, which means with China and beyond. It means that there were a connection with Central Asia, but in the West with the Byzantine Empire, the Caucasus, etc. So the Sasanians were not only giving, but they were also receiving textile motifs, for example. And what I'm proposing here is that they adopted something like this composite creature, and represented in Takebustan. When we have a representation of the real Simurgh, like in these paintings from Penjikent, which is early 8th century CE, we should have the Simurgh, because the Simurgh was the protector of Rustam and his family. And the creature flying in front of Rustam is, again, in my opinion, the Farn, a composite creature. The Simurgh is the bird behind him, like an owl. This is the identification I propose for this painting. And in my opinion, this is proving beyond any doubt that the Simurgh was a bird, and the composite creature was the symbol of Farn, the symbol of glory. In Persian miniatures, the Simurgh is always a kind of Chinese Feng Huang or phoenix, like in this painting from the 14th century. We have many Chinese elements here. The Simurgh, which is a phoenix practically, the rocks, the clouds, everything is telling us that there is a very strong Chinese presence, Chinese influence here. Because when the Mongols conquered everything, they exported this style, which is the style of Sung China. But there are some very few, a small group of miniatures, of book illustrations, where we have a clear representation of Simurgh, because he's always accompanied by inscriptions, and he's always a bird. And he's not exactly the Chinese. Sometimes he looks like an owl. Showing you different examples from different libraries. They are from the Injuid, which is post-Mongol period Iran, or Ilkhanid, which is Mongol. And we have always this kind of bird, which is characterized by feathers or horns or antlers on his head, and is not flying like the Chinese phoenix usually. And I think that this is the correct identification of the bird we have in Sogdian paintings. So the Simurgh is a bird, and the creature with a dog face, wings, and a peacock tail is something, the glory. Here we have, for example, a very unusual representation of Simurgh, which is represented as a rooster, but again with this feather on the head. It's here a giant bird on the left. So this is just to tell you that, to insist that Simurgh, or Sanmurgh in Middle Persian, was a bird. And the composite creature we have in Takebustan is something else, is glorification. Something which was protecting Bastam, who built the first stage at Takebustan, and he was the governor of Central Asia under the Sasanians, and he was the one who imported this creature and gave to the Sasanians. We have also this recently restored part in the Hermitage Museum of the painting of Rustam, and again the giant bird. Unfortunately, we don't have the head, but probably we could propose as a reconstruction a bird with these feathers on the head. In Takebustan, we don't have just that composite creature. We have many other elements, and sometimes we have a bird like this one, which is very interesting because of these ears or feathers or horns, antlers, whatever, on the head. And this could be the true Simurg or Sanmur, the Middle Persian. But again, if we had other elements like the composite creature with dog face, wings, and peacock tail imported from Central Asia into Sasanian Persia, then we could think that also this creature has been introduced from Central Asia. In fact, the Simurg was protecting Rustam, and Rustam in the epic, the Persian book of kings, which is called also Shahnameh, the Simurg is protecting Rustam. And Rustam was not a good Zoroastrian, he was an heretic. So the Sasanians wanted to connect themselves with Zoroastrianism and with the champion of Zoroastrianism, who was Isfandiar. At a certain point, Isfandiar and Rustam have a duel, they fight together, and Isfandiar is killed by Rustam. So Rustam, heretic, protected by Simurg. Sasanians want to be connected with Isfandiar. So they don't like Rustam, they don't like Simurg. So I would be very surprised if in Sasanian art we would ever find an image of this Simurg. Bird or creature, I think it's a bird, but not Sasanian at all. And we have also, in this dish, for example, something which has been considered to be typically Sasanian, but in my opinion, it's Eastern Iranian. There are many Buddhist elements here. And again, we have a giant bird with this ear. And this bird could be connected with what we call phoenix. The phoenix and Simurg are practically the same giant bird connected with immortality, with long life, etc. We have this kind of birds in every culture, everywhere. But if we have to search for an image of Simurg in post-Sasanian art, even during the Islamic period, Persian art, we probably can find something like this. We have to look for a bird with ears. In that case, we could have something like the real Simurg even in Takebustan, in the slide I showed you earlier. Otherwise, the composite creature, in my opinion, should be identified with the glory. And to conclude, I summarize here my main points, which I have just told you. So, Takebustan is a late Sasanian monument. It was started by the man who gave the name to the site, which is called also Takebastam. This Bastam was the general of Khosrow II. He rebelled, and that's why Khosrow started the destruction of his monument and started to appropriate his symbol of glorification. This symbol of glorification was already present in Sogdian paintings, on Sogdian countermarks, on Hunnish or Turkish coins from modern Afghanistan, and from there it arrived in Persia. Then it became extremely popular everywhere, at least until the 12th century. So what we have to do with Sasanian art is to be very careful, and especially be very careful when we identify some motifs, especially used on textiles, as something that has been considered in the past without any critics to be typically Sasanian. In fact, we have enough elements to say that it's not what we thought it was at all. So it's not the Simurg, but it's the glory, Farn in Sogdian, Far in Persian. And it's not Sasanian, it's something that the Sasanians themselves imported, probably during the time of Khosrow II. Thank you very much for your attention.